Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about epistemology of critical realism. So what was epistemology? How do we know? How do we extract knowledge from reality? For critical realism, and what is the objective of knowledge, right? It is also one of the questions concerning epistemology. For critical realism, the objective of knowledge, producing knowledge, is not prediction. Again, this is a critique. This is a a counterpoint to positivism. For critical realism, prediction is not possible, is not the main aim of science. What is the aim? It is to explain and understand. And what is next? To change. Why is it critical? Because this body of knowledge, this approach, also claims that there is a responsibility of a knowing person. And if you know something, if you know the problems, you also know how to solve the problems. Okay? So there is for critical realism, and like every other position that takes critical as its prefix, the intention, the aim, the objective is emancipation, empowerment. All right? So this is the objective of knowledge for critical realism, objective of producing knowledge for critical realism. So again, for positivism, we said prediction was very important. Why? Because it is about observation. For critical realism, observation brings us certain predictable features. Yet, is it necessarily explaining? So there may be some non-explanatory predictions. If you will know what happens to this pen when I drop it, when I release it. It will drop, it will fall to the ground. So you will predict, but will you be explaining gravity with this prediction? No. Explaining gravity requires something else, not simply observation. We mentioned it in our previous videos. So, for critical realism, therefore, explanation requires certain other methodologies. What are they? Well, this is the epistemology of critical realism is very much related to its ontology. We said it is mainly an ontological standpoint. And from that ontological standpoint, an epistemological frame is provided. For critical realism, world is an open environment. It's an open system. Well, the world cannot be squeezed into a lab or into a test tube. So in many natural sciences, perhaps in chemistry and physics, they can conduct experiments. But in many natural sciences as well, the natural world is also an open system. There are different mechanisms interacting and counteracting sometimes. So for critical realism, you don't necessarily observe every reality, right? And you don't necessarily observe the actualized potentials of the real. It is not always going to the empirical level. Think of a flying bird. When you see a flying bird, what do you see? Can you see gravity there? So if you can't see gravity, would you conclude that gravity doesn't exist? It is not a force exerted on this bird. No, you cannot. You cannot say. Because there is another dynamic. There is another mechanisms, right? And it is making the bird fly, resisting the gravity, aerodynamics. So there are two different mechanisms working at the same time on the bird, yet you don't see it. Until when? Until something happens and the bird is shot or something happens, then you see the bird falling down. Then you see the gravity, right? So this is very important for critical realism. There are different mechanisms, different structures interacting and perhaps counteracting. And how are you going to understand which one is affecting the empirical reality, which one is affecting the observed reality? So that requires abstraction. So for epistemology of critical realism, abstraction is very important. We said we cannot take social reality into test tube, right? You cannot simply sort of separate different components, different elements of social reality and see how much of it is affecting, right? So what you do is a mental construction. What you do is a reasoning. So you look at the labor market, and when you look at the labor market, you see the effect of patriarchy, right? For instance, you observe the pay gap between men and women doing similar jobs and earning women earning less than men. Why is that so? Well, apparently patriarchy is a mechanism that is interacting or affecting on this observed reality. What else? Capitalism, market relations. It's another mechanism that is also in effect, that is also in action in the market. So how are you going to understand, how are you going to differentiate one another? And how are you going to sort of measure how much of it is effective in this reality? That you need to perhaps play some counterfactual thinking. You have to think, what happens if capitalism works without patriarchy? Can capitalism exist without patriarchy? Can patriarchy exist without capitalism? So you need to separate, well, not really, but in abstraction, right? You need to abstract one element, one mechanism, if you like, and study it on its own and try to sort of hypothesize. You are going to hypothesize the relationship between patriarchy and capitalism. So you're going to try to sort of write down a mechanism of how those two are interrelated and interacting in the market. So this is how critical realism suggests for production of knowledge. Therefore, for critical realism, theory is very important. Concepts are very important. Well, we have discussed this for positivism and for subjectivism. If you remember, for both positivism and subjectivism, concepts were instrumental. For positivism, concepts were names, right? They did not entail an essential nature of it. They were instrumental in differentiating one event from the other. For subjectivism, well, it was a construction, it was an interpretation of the scientist, those concepts. Therefore, each concept was indeed constructed in a particular research, in a particular project. For critical realism, theorization, concepts are very central in our understandings, because it is how the concepts and theories, we are reaching those literature through abstraction. And that requires a long-term understanding, long-term study of what we see empirically today. What we're observing is a snapshot of reality, but we need to historicize it. We need to study its evolution, right? And for that, we need a theory of it. We need a periodization of it. So that requires a theory. That requires a body of concepts interlinked together that explains how world functions as such in front of our eyes. And these are all the theories in explaining different aspects of how world functions. So for critical realism, theorization, abstraction, and concept formation is very important. We perhaps start with the empirical level and look at how things are, right? You go to the market and you observe the market relations. You observe sort of a money changing hand. But how are you going to understand what's happening in that supermarket? You need to understand the market relations. You need to understand the evolution of money, right? So observation, field work is meaningful if you contextualize it and if you historicize it. So this is how critical realism suggests for epistemology, suggests for knowledge. So it doesn't, critical realism, unlike subjectivism or positivism, does not provide a particular methodology, does not provide a particular tool. That makes it a bit difficult, that makes it a bit challenging. Yet, what it suggests is the methodology should comply, should be compatible with the nature of reality. So first, you need to study the ontology of your reality. You need to study the subject matter and how it exists, what is the reality of it. Then you need to craft, you need to design your own methodology. You can borrow from subjectivism, you can borrow from positivism if it is compatible with your subject matter. So critical realism, in effect, is against that duality of positivism and hermeneutics, because it argues that methodology is not predetermined. It should be crafted, it should be designed according to the reality, according to the research question. Therefore, for critical realism, research questions should come first, and then the nature of the subject matter should be studied next, and the mechanisms. What are the relevant aspects of it? What are the historical background of it? Then, once you get to understand the ontological nature of your subject matter, then, according to critical realism, then you can suggest, you can design your own research. You can gather the suitable tools, methodological tools for that particular research. So this is for the epistemology of critical realism. So we will be talking more in detail of the methodology of critical realism as we proceed in class and as we proceed towards the stages of social research. Thank you.